Hi, everyone. Shane from SiouxperCon here again. Thanks for tuning in to SiouxperConline. We wish we were with you physically, but this is still pretty cool. I am so honored to be joined by the talented Kami Garcia. Kami has, well, we'll get into this, but she's probably touched the heart of any young person you have living in your home right now, because she has, through Teen Titans, through Beautiful Creatures, she is a great writer, and we're so lucky to have her. Kami, welcome to SiouxperConline.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, so I unintentionally, and I don't know if it's because I have a 12-year-old or what, but unintentionally, I somehow ended up with, Shea Fontana, Judd Winnick, Kazoo, and yourself, who own most of my wallet thanks to my 12-year-old son. So thank you for that, by the way. Thank you for taking on my name, but also thank you for writing books and stories that are accessible to young writers, to young readers. Was that something intentional? Is that where you wanted to go when you started your career?
So I was a teacher for 17 years. I became a writer by accident. Teaching is the thing that I care most about. And I taught elementary, but I taught book groups, and I tutored all the way through high school in English and reading. I'm a reading specialist. I wrote my first novel is co-authored with with Margaret Stoll, who is my best friend.
Yes.
And for 11 years. Whoops. I
You're
don't know what
fine.
happened.
You're fine. You're fine.
And so my first book was co-authored with Margaret Stoll, my best friend. And basically I was teaching. Two of her daughters were my students, and I taught a fantasy book club. And basically we wrote Beautiful Creatures as a almost serialized story for teens and preteens in my fantasy book club. We did not published. We wrote it the way, like Dickens wrote. We gave them chapters every other day. We wrote it like a bedtime story, where we knew what those kids wanted to hear, what kind of book story they were looking for. We didn't call it a book. We literally called it a story. And, when it was done, it had gone virally through several high schools where my students had moved on, and Margie's daughters went to school. And a middle grade writer who was, a well-established professional writer with an agent in books, who Margie grew up with, was also reading it, and he sent it to his agent without telling us. So that got an agent. Like, I always tell people, if we had been, Margie and I are so self-conscious, and if we had been trying to write a book that would be popular, it would have been a disaster. I feel like we only did a great job because we were doing it for love and not for money. And there was no stakes for us. The stakes were winning a bet and making the kids love the book. It wasn't like send the book out in the world and get people to buy it. And that kind of philosophy of writing for a small group of people that I see as my audience has carried over into everything I do. So once Beautiful Creatures became popular, then I was writing for the Beautiful Creatures fans. Then when I went solo, I was writing for those fans and my new fans. And when I made the switch to graphic novels, when I wanted to try that, I basically, as a fan myself, I saw it as now my readers are possibly my readers, but also fans of, the Teen Titans or Joker and Harley.
Yeah, yeah. So coming from an education background, working with children, seeing the maybe draw from physical reading to reading to video games taken away. I mean, I think about, I'm 52 years old, and it was such a joy to go to the library. We had 3 channels, it was a joy for me to go to the library, and I'd leave with stacks of books. As an educator and in the trenches, so to speak, with these kids, how much of a challenge was it to get kids to read, to engage in books again, or still?
So I'm close to your age. I'm almost 50. And so I was like a bookmobile kid and all of that. Yeah. I always tell people when I was in high school, there were computers, but they were like the size of the refrigerator.
Right. Yep.
And we didn't have them school. Like, you know, I think there were a couple in like the labs, but that was it. Oh my God, my allergies are so bad. So for me, like, I don't know. I feel like the key is, it's one reason I love comics and graphic novels, which I also loved growing up. I feel like the key is to find something that a kid or an adult, a non-reader wants to read. If
Right.
you can find something they're interested in, whether it's, you know, a subject like a sport, you know, an interest, a proper, you know, an IP, if it's Marvel or DC or anything like that. If you can find the thing that they are interested in, and you can find a book that has a character like that or that subject matter. For example, you know, I write fiction. My son does not read fiction. My
Okay.
son, from a very young age, was reading those like Star Wars, like the nonfiction Star Wars universe books about like the ships and the planets and the droids,
Sure.
you know, the guides. Like, he was not interested in reading regular fiction. Um, and he still prefers nonfiction or topical.
Yep.
Um, I have four brothers. Two of them are dyslexic. They grew up reading graphic novels and comics and, you know, Sports Illustrated and things like that, you know, with sports stories, because novels were too cumbersome. You know, it's
Yeah.
too much
Yeah.
text.
Yep, yep, yep. I'm dyslexic as well, but yeah, in fourth grade I was reading as a 12th grader. I fully believe, Cami, that was because of comic books, because of Stan Lee making up words that don't exist anywhere else. So you had to figure it out, the context. What does this mean? What is adamantium? What is, you know, whatever it may be. And so you're right, that difficulty of picking up the Red Badge of Courage, which I struggle through, but I could read, you know, as many pages just in a comic book or graphic form. So I think that's a great point, and I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, that was exactly the way it
Graphic,
worked for me.
there's a lot of research now. You know, when we were younger, they didn't, you know, they didn't know anything about sequential storytelling.
Right.
It wasn't something people did their theses on and studied, but now it is. And, you know, reading a comic or a graphic novel, a sequential story, is actually more complex for your brain than reading a novel, because your mind has to process text and pictures and also fill in all those gaps between panels, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Trevor
You're
Mueller and I were just talking about that. The off the off panel action, the off panel happening, and your mind has to fill in the blanks. And it's so based off your own personal experience and your own successes and trauma. And yeah, it's
yeah,
very complex.
totally story. And that's one reason why, you know, and I write the Teen Titans and different characters, it's really important for me that they're relatable, because the more someone can relate to the character, um, the more they can put themselves in the story and create that story, you know, in their mind. It's, I always say, it's like a movie in your mind. When you're reading, you're watching that movie and it's playing out in your mind as you're, you know, reading and constructing the story.
Yeah, yeah. So let's go back to Beautiful Creatures. So here you are writing basically a bet, page by page, chapter by chapter, presented to. When did you know? I mean, you shared this beautiful story of a mutual friend sharing it with her editor. But when did you know, Kami, that this was really something? Because it is. It's a beautiful story.
I mean, Margie and I thought it was special because, you know, we impressed these readers who were kids who read all the time and had
Right.
read a lot of books. But even when it was auctioned, which means, you know, it's like a house. It means like more than one publisher wanted it.
Mhm.
You know, it was a big deal, but we still were, you know, very pessimistic, because we're like realists, and we also were in our 30s. You know, we weren't like 17. Margie and I were in our 30s and already had careers. So
Yeah.
we knew, like, you know, writing is very much a crapshoot. Like, it can go really well, but there's a lot of factors that go into it, like marketing and timing and stuff that have nothing to do with whether or not the comic or the book is good. And so we didn't really have super high expectations. I was still teaching when Beautiful Creatures came out and when we went on our first tour. Um,
Wow.
so, you know, we were shocked because, you know, the book, even before it came out, I think it had already, the rights were already in like, you know, 20 some countries. Now it's in
Wow.
50 countries and 38 languages. And, you know, I mean, people really seem to respond to it, but I always attribute that to the fact that we really didn't know what we were doing. So we were writing as readers, you know, we were writing very intuitively, like the kind of story we would want to read as readers. I think one of the problems with people when they write for teens, especially, is, but even middle grade, you know, they try to like dumb down the story and the complexity. And then, you know, teens are bored. Like they don't really want to get invested if there's no world building and there's no real story. And the only thing my Joker Harley Criminal Sanity series for Black Label at DC is the only thing other than short stories that I've ever written that is specifically written for adults. Everything else I write, my intent is always like my primary audience is teens, but I feel like most of what I write is really, you know, appropriate for any age because, you know, I always make sure there's adult characters. Like, I just feel like it's important to show a whole picture of a character's life and the way they interact, not just with like their friends, but with their family. All of that stuff, I think, informs kind of who the character is and what they become.
Right. I love that you said we didn't know what we were doing, because literally the co-founder, Brian, and I say this all the time when we started SiouxperCon. We had no idea what we were doing. We just wanted to make some place for nerds and geeks to hang out because we were nerdy and geeky. And it grew from a hotel basement to a 5,000 people in a convention center now within 4 years. But again, the success has surprised us because literally we're just doing what we thought our friends and people that are like us would enjoy. And I love that you said we didn't know what we were doing. We just wrote something that we wanted kids to love.
That formula works because, you know, Margie and I also co-founded one of the biggest young adult literature festivals in the country, Y'all Fest, and then the sister festival, Y'all West, Margie co-founded, and I'm on the board of. And then, you know, I ended up doing Creators for Comics, the big benefit initiative that I co-organized with Gwenda Bond and Sam Humphreys. And it was the same thing. You know, I called up Sam and he was giving me ideas. And I'm like, okay, let's do this thing. He's like, we don't know how to do this. Like, what are you talking about? And I said, Sam, I said, like, and I said, like, okay, this is how we did Y'all Fest. Like, this is what we're going to do. And Gwenda, of course, knows me and is the same way. She's like she started out in, you know, local government. So like, she was like, no, we just start emailing people. And I said, you're just going to email and message everyone you've ever met who's like seen a comic, written a comic, drawn a comic, lettered a comic, or liked a comic. And Sam was like, what do you mean? And I said, like, I said, like, you know, I messaged Jeff Johns. He's like, do you know Jeff Johns? I was like, no. And he said, but it's not for like my birthday party. This is for charity. Like, you know, like this is to help stores. Like, we are all nerds. We all love stores. Like, yeah, you're right. Like these are like our people. And I said, like, it's different if we were asking them to like read our book, but we're asking them to like help something that we know they already love. And the worst thing they can say is no. And I said, but they can't say yes if we don't ask. And the minute I said that, Sam's like, I got this. And he was like asking everyone in the universe.
Yep. This is the same thing. Like, I've had people, you know, like local news ask me, well, how did you get such and such to come to Sioux Falls? I asked, right? I know what no is. If they say no, I just move on to the next person. I mean, it's no hard feelings. That's, you know, it's just, I love that.
Like, sometimes they'll do it the next year or another time, you know?
It's exciting to this creative process that once you decide that this is what I'm going to do, then you take whatever measures and you just move forward and you get it on paper, you get it out there. And I love that.
I will say that, like, there was a freedom, obviously, in knowing that we were doing the story for love. And, you know, something like Creators for Comics or SiouxperCon, where you're doing something that's like free, that's a charity to benefit the community rather than yourself. To me, that's always less risky to ask people for. Right? But it's harder to ask readers or people who don't know you to take a chance and buy your book or check it out of the library, or to ask your readers, you know, hey, I have a new thing and will you please support it?
Right.
And that is a bigger risk, but you know, I was reading online. I know Matthew Dowell Smith. I worked on an X-Files original novel IP project years ago with Jonathan Mayberry, where I did, they're called the X-Files Origins. They became
Yeah.
canon. I did Teen Mulder and he did Teen Scully in continuity so that, you know, they hadn't met. And Matthew Dowell Smith was working on the comics, and it was kind of like a conjunctive thing. So he and I met online because I needed, you know, we had to like kind of compare notes on some things. And I ended up following him over time. And then weirdly, I ended up in comics, and he posted something yesterday or the day before saying like, you know, don't wait 27 years to do the thing you really want to do. Because he just started a Kickstarter, like where he's putting his own comic out there. And he was, it was the idea of like, you know, gamble on yourself. Like, don't wait forever to do this thing that you want to do because you're scared. And I feel like if Margie and I had wanted to write a book, we would have just never gotten going.
Right.
We would,
Right.
you know, would have been too scared.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you get any fan, I don't want to say backlash, but pushback when you went, okay, this is done now? Because maybe I'm just the horrible outlier, but like when Patricia Cornwell doesn't write a Scarpetta novel, I like want to drive to Patricia Cornwell's house and say, "Where's my Scarpetta? How dare you write something else? I need to know what she's doing next." And or when you know, there's a different Jonathan Kellerman doesn't write Alex Delaware, because I'm invested in these characters. So you created this beautiful world. You know, Margie created this beautiful world. It carried out. When you went, okay, I'm shifting gears here. Was there a pushback, or have your fans followed you?
You know, we did a lot in the Beautiful Creatures universe. There's a manga there from Yen Press that Cassandra Jean adapted. It was one of the first big gigs she had, and she knocked it out of the park. There's also, we ended up doing a spin-off series called Dangerous Creatures, which was two books that were kind of a love letter, like story our fans were always asking for. We also a series of novellas called we called them the Beautiful Creatures Untold Stories, and they were again things fans asked us, like, you know, please tell us about Ridley's Claiming, please tell us about Lila and Make It in College. The one thing that was really hard was my first solo series, The Legion, which the first two books, Unbreakable and Unmarked, came out, and the publisher didn't buy the third book. And I get a lot of fans really are upset about that, which I understand. And I think now I've gotten the rights back, so I'm trying to come up with a plan so I can put out book 3. But aside from that, where I get it, because like I also would not want to be invested in a series, and I would want to know how it ends. Right. But aside from that, not really. I was expecting to get more backlash from the DC stuff, because Joker Harley is Harley as a profiler hunting the Joker, and there's no story. So I was like, people might not like that. And the same with Titans, like, you know, Gar isn't green.
Right.
Transforms. He has green in his hair, but same with Raven. You know, she doesn't have the jewel embedded in her head. It's her neck. So I was expecting more kind of backlash from fans who wanted to see the exact characters from the comics rather than more realistic takes of those characters. But we really haven't seen much of it. Like, I feel like, especially because I'm a fan of all those characters, like for me, there was never the intent of like, I'm going to totally remake Raven, or I'm going to totally remake, you know, Joker. Like, I don't want him to be anything like he was before. I think if you do that, fans do not like that, because obviously we love the thing we love and we want to see some semblance of that thing. But I think if you go into it where you're doing a new take on a character, but you're still preserving like the essence of what makes that character special, you know, to the fandom, I think then you can get away with a lot more. And the same thing, I mean, when the X-Files Origins was announced, people were going, because Jonathan Mayberry's very, you know, established. He's older than I. He's, you know, done hundreds of comics before he ever even got into novels. and he has, you know, he's the author of V Wars. He's written for Marvel, DC, Dark Horse, and he has all these novels too. So people were going on and saying, like, you know, why is she doing Mulder? Like, why, you know, like, why aren't she writing the female character? And Jonathan was just not, because Jonathan is not that guy. He is just so progressive. And he was like, what are you talking about? Like, I write female characters, like anyone can write anything.
Right.
And, you know, I had done a Teen Mulder story for an anthology that he edited, which is how we kind of, you know, how the whole thing came about. He had always wanted to do those stories, and he kind of had this plan of how it could happen. But even when I got the backlash, I said to people, like, you know, wait until you read the book, and then you're free to judge. But don't like decide you don't, you know, it's not going to be good because you think he should write the guy and I should write the girl. Like, wait and see what it is before you judge it. And I kind of had to take with Harley and Joker. I was like, you know, you don't know what this looks like because no one's done this. So like, see what you think first, and then you can, if you don't like it, like, you can share with me.
If there's one thing that is consistent about fandom, it's that there is a tendency to jump to conclusions, that this is not going to be what I want. Like you have sole proprietorship over the character, and you're right. We all want to have a familiarity. I was talking to Shea Fontana about this with her Batman Overdrive, right? 80 years of history,
Yeah.
of Joker, you know. So there is establishment, but there's room to play. You know, nobody had touched teenage Bruce and, you know, that relationship with Alfred. So, you know, coming into your Teen Titan books, and just, they're beautiful, but they're recognizable. When I picked up Raven, I was so touched by it that I finished it, and the next day when I dropped my son off at his sixth grade class, I put it in the hands of his sixth grade teacher, and I said, I need you to share this with your kids. You know, I don't need anything for it. Like, keep it in your library, in your room, or move it between the other two teachers. But this book needs to be read because this character, this fantasy character, this half witch, half demon character, is one of the most real teenage girls I've ever read. And I worked with at-risk teens on Native American reservations here in South Dakota before I went into adult counseling. Kami, she's real. That is, you found a voice there, and it's amazing. Where did you draw that from?
It's interesting because early in the process, you know, they gave me a lot of leeway, and they kept saying, you don't have to do this, you don't have to do that. But one of the things that I felt in my gut was that if I kept the, you know, the core of who the character was, and then I added rather than just taking away.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
And it was interesting because I met Marv Wolfman. It was very engineered because I'm super nervous and I'm a big fangirl. So Michelle, yeah. So Michelle Wells, who's the VP and, you know, the head of the entire line, who was also my editor at the time, knew, like, I would not want to meet Marv Wolfman. That would have been super intimidating. So they engineered this thing where basically he was at DC's offices and I was there, and they were like, oh, Marv Wolfman happens to be in the office and he wants to have lunch. So then they like took us all to lunch, and I'm super freaked out because I was like, oh my God, like, because I'm a huge X-Men fan also. And I was like, you know, he's just like you know, I'm like an X-Men fan. And then like, I've always felt like the Teen Titans was kind of the answer to DC's answer to
Sure.
Because again, like, it felt like, you know, they're not perfect. Like, they don't have it all figured out, kind of like Superman is so together, you know, like they kind of haphazard. And I said to him, like, you know, is there anything you think I should do, or, you know, any advice? And he literally said, like, you know, a version of like, I want you to make the character your own. I just want like a new generation to find Raven and love her as much as I do. And that was like the thing he cared about. And I was like, that I can do, you know, because I love the character. So I'm like, I just have to make sure that I translate that onto the page. But the truth is, the real magic came when I have found Gabriel Piccolo, who's my my artist, because Gabriel has, like, when I saw his stuff, he was already drawing fan art online, which was, he called the Casual Teen Titans, which was like the Teen Titans in regular clothes.
Yep.
And
Yep.
because they kept sending me samples for artists, and I was kind of hunting around. And when I saw that, I was like, this is exactly what this series needs. Like, this is what it needs to look like for kids to imagine that, like, Raven could be their friend at school.
Oh, their classmate. Yeah.
And he and I got together, and he started sending character, because even though he was already doing a version of the characters, we wanted him to, he wanted it to be a little different, obviously, and so did I.
Mm-hmm.
So we made some changes, and he started sending the characters, but also just like expressions and stuff, and that made her so real. And he did the same Beast Boy. And Gar, I've always felt, was like a very underdeveloped character because he's super sweet and very funny, but you don't get to know a lot about him other than like the fact that he has a great sense of humor, and everybody, he makes everyone laugh. And so Gabriel was also like, he was like, I want a book where I get to see him with like problems and worries and things that like he has to deal with besides being like like a prankster and a jokester. And we kept the humor, obviously, because that's the core of Beast Boy. But we wanted to layer in other things, so you really got a sense of him being like the sum of his parts being more than just, a funny kid.
Well, Kami, you know this from your years of education. Usually that loud, show-off, boisterous, joking kid has issues that they're overcompensating for, right?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, the body language, all of that. I mean, Go on. I'm sorry.
Really, like, he, like, when I write the script, like, I am much looser when I write the Titan scripts, obviously, than Joker, because Joker's also a procedural. So it's very specific. It's like a mystery unfolding. Whereas with Titans, I can just say to Gabriel, like, sometimes I'll just write something like, Beast Boy's in class, and he's like feeling super awkward because things did not like go according to plan. And now he's self-conscious, and Gabriel just knows what that means. Like, he knows. I don't have to say like one eyebrow is lifted. Like, some artists prefer that, but what I found with Gabriel is because he's so good at emotion, he prefers for me to just like tell him how Beast Boy is feeling, and then he translates that into the emotion.
Yeah, it's a beautiful collaboration because it works. And I wanted to ask about the process, and you've already touched on it. Yeah, if for him to be able to, you both have a real sense of teen, and I don't know what that speaks to, but you've captured what teenagers act. I have a 12-year-old, man, and they act like that, like 100%.
I have a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old.
Yeah, they 100% act like, and they look like that. Yeah, it's one of the realest portrayals. I would put it there with what is being done with Miles. I think Miles is another one that's just spectacular.
That's my favorite. I mean, Miles Morales Spider-Man, like, just how real, and Brian Michael Bendis, like, I'm a huge fan, and he was actually he was someone that when I started Joker and Harley, I wanted to learn more because I understood graphic novels, but I wanted to understand more about serialized periodicals, like where things are coming out in bits. And he's really the person I turn to. But one of the, I also got to know him a lot better because he worked on Creators for Comics with us. And, but one of the things that, I feel like is so accessible about his work is just, it has heart. His characters have heart. And all of my favorite writers, Jeff Lemire, Brian, Kelly Sue DeConnick, like, Sam Humphries, Teenie Howard, like, these are people, Gail Simone, like, the characters have heart, you feel like they're real people versus someone who's just drawing, like writing an icon, but so inaccessible.
So there was this change, and you're right, Lemire, Bendis were maybe at the front of it, 2000 when we brought when Brian brought Peter into 2000, into the new generation Ultimate Spider-Man, and that felt like the way teenagers talk, and it felt like the way teenagers act. There was an awkwardness that was real, and I love seeing that. I love seeing that carry over and being written, because I think that we all look for a character that we relate to, right? We all want to see a little bit of ourselves portrayed, whether it be on the big screen, the small screen, or in print. It helps us, right? It helps us work through ourselves.
Yeah, and
that's the beauty of writing.
I really like the Titans, DC Universe show also, because the Umbrella Academy, things like that, where the characters are really flawed and real, and they don't. I mean, and even like Smallville, where you see Clark and Superman, and you realize, that Clark, he's still pure of heart. He's still such a good guy, but he has problems, and he doesn't have it all figured out.
Right,
I think that's one reason why Batman was always one of my favorites, and DC was it was always until X-Men, I was really preferred just DC stuff, because I really liked the idea of someone who not only wasn't perfect, but didn't have these all powerful abilities, because even though Raven does, she still has the handicap of Trigon, of having the deep father trying to take control of her. So she's not all powerful and 100% in control of her powers. That's also why we made the decision when I was conceiving of it, and then Gabriel loved it, that our Titans are developing their powers they're not they haven't had them forever, and they're able, they've just started to manifest. So even if they've had them, they were dormant. So that we see that they don't really know how to use them, and even if they do, it doesn't always go according to plan, because it's not more fun.
Well, it's such a commentary on puberty, right? It's right. I mean, from the original, and I don't know if that's what Wolfman intended, and I don't know if that's what
you'll see, his powers start to manifest when he has a growth spurt, when his voice drops. It does coincide very much with him, having his huge, puberty jump.
Right. There's something that everyone can relate to. That awkwardness that we all felt, the voice changing, the cracking, body changing, male, female, it's universal. What's happening to me, and why is everyone looking at me? And when you can capture that and sell that and feel that, it's you have a gift, Kami. It's beautiful in that ear.
I think that kind of people who write or create films or art or TV for teens, when it really hits, the people who really work for that age group out of love, I just feel we really remember that time, that we remember it in a way that's really visceral and authentic. Whereas, I have other friends that they remember their college years the most vividly. That was super impactful for them. For me, being a teenager, those were the years that formed really who I was going to be. And even though I had really profound things happen to me in my 20s, none of that had the same impact as what happened to me as a teenager.
I always felt like John Hughes hit 18 and said, that's as far as I need to go, right?
Yeah.
Because everything, his voice too, with Breakfast Club, 16 Candles, you name them, those, especially from our age group, those were our peers, and it felt like our peers. We all knew a nerd, a geek, a jock. We knew all those kids, right? So I always felt like John Hughes went, 18's enough. I'll continue to advance.
I know, but I always feel that way also about the outsiders. So
S.E. Hinton, yes.
Except for that's such a homogenous kind of cast, because it's it's like a white suburb, but I grew up outside of DC, which is much more diverse. So for me, it was always that feeling of, again, trying to capture, obviously with more diversity, because we're not writing about the Midwest, the idea of the John Hughes kind of movie where you're just really telling a true teen story even because the other thing I find is that a lot of people, more so in prose, I think, than comics, because comics are read by so many people of different ages. In prose, people are constantly trying to write a book that appeals to every age group.
Right.
And, you know, like they want a crossover, they want like this universal hit. And I feel like, you know, one of the conscious choices that I made early on was I'm going to write for my specific tribe of people. And those are teens or people who can access, you know, really remember vividly what that time was like. And if other people like the work, great. But that's the primary audience. And aside from something like Joker, where that's not the audience I had in mind, you know, my teen stuff is like, if I get other people, great. You know, Beautiful Creatures, I would have grandmothers come with their granddaughters and they book. And the grandmother's related to, you know, Alma and, you know, or Marion or and the, you know, the granddaughters related to Lena and Ridley and Liv. But at the same time, you know, that was a byproduct. Like the grandmothers and, you know, or we had a lot of adult men, you know, like those weren't our target audience. Our audience was always the teens. And if other people like it, great. But I do try to keep in mind who my audience is when I'm writing. And because I do feel like, you know, there are writers who talk about writing for themselves. You know, they find it
therapeutic writing. Yeah.
I don't do that. I write, like, writing to me, writing comics and graphic novels is much more natural. Writing novels for me is like painful until I have a draft. But again, like I keep in mind like who I'm writing for, because like, you know, again, when sometimes people will say, oh, well, I got this bad review or these people don't like it. Like I always say like, those aren't your tribe then. Those aren't your readers, you know, per se. Like those are not the people that have come together, you know, to form a collective family by choice. And, you know, that's one of the things that's really important to me is that idea of like, and I think people use the word tribe sometimes because of that sense of community, you know, of, shared history and understanding and community and like the desire to be a group, like a unit. And I feel like, that's what I want to see is not the people who are forced together, like you have to be a community, but the people who collectively want to be a part of each other's lives and want to share experiences and like carry the weight together.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes to, there's groups that come together. Maybe that's why you were drawn to X-Men and Teen Titans, these outcasts that, look, we're going to be together. We're going to have each other's backs. We're going to have this. I say to my clients all the time that, blood relation just means you share DNA. That's all that means, right? You choose your tribe, you choose your clan, you choose your people, and it's people who share.
Plan, like the people that you have decided you are going to be in the thick of it with.
Right, absolutely. So how much of your past, of your teenage experiences in Raven or is in Gar?
I mean, a lot. So Raven very much, is about identity and like not letting like you said, your blood, your parentage define you. She's a foster kid. She loses her mother in a car accident, and she has a type of trauma-based amnesia at the beginning. That was my answer to how do we hide Trigon and kind of those conflicts from her and make her rediscover them with the reader. And everyone's like, oh, that's so cliche. And I was like, everything is cliche. Everything's a trope. You just have to do it well. And she's a foster kid. She has one of those relationships where her mother has been fostering her since forever and is going to adopt her. She loses her mother, and so she has to go live in New Orleans with her, basically her foster mom's sister and daughter, who's her age. So suddenly has kind of a new foster mother figure and a new foster sister. And so she's thrown into kind of this new family, but found family is something I always kind of explore in my work because it's important to me, and it was growing up, you know, the idea of choosing who your people are. And so one of the things that's hard is she, you know, starts hearing Trigon's voice kind of in her head, and she's not sure if that's something that was happening before. She can't remember a lot of things about herself that we take for granted, like what's your favorite, what's your favorite song? She has all these people kind of, and this voice telling her who she is, and she has to figure out who she wants to be and define herself. And that's very like relevant to me. I wasn't like ever bullied or like super fringe where like I didn't have friends, but I never want to be like in the popular group,
Right.
the like,
Right.
for me group either. I kind of had my own friends and I was good with that. But I was always struggling with like, who am I and what does that mean? And what if I'm not like my siblings or my other friends or my parents? And then in Beast Boy, he embodies a lot of, I think he as a character embodies a lot more of Gabriel, who I know really well. Gabriel's gone on tour with me. He's young enough to be my son. He's stayed with my family for weeks at a time. And so I really got to know him. And he is a very gregarious, friendly, like, smiley, open guy. But there's a lot more to him as you get to know him. And he also, it was really important to him. He would talk to me about the fact that like he wanted teens to see the layers in Gar and see like what you said, that like the thing you put out there, for people to, see on the outside isn't always like everything going on the inside. So I kind of kept that as my compass. And then his best friends, Tank and Stella. Tank is a Japanese American athlete. We kind of went very much against type.
Yeah.
Like he's not like he's super tall. He's very athletic. I kind of think it's sad that we always have a stereotype that if you're Asian, you have to be super studious and nerdy, and you're not an athlete. And we have all these Olympians that are Asian. So
right.
And then Stella, his other best friend, is Afro-Latina, Latinx, and she has blue hair. She's like a gamer, very much her own person, and a lot of times we think of gamers as guys, and she's like a gamer. And then she has a lot of my kids. They have a lot of my kids in them.
No. Okay.
My daughter's dyslexic and Tank's dyslexic in the book. So like, we really tried to put a lot of like, things that we knew or that we knew teens struggle with into the book. Raven has, two of her best friends are a gay couple, two girls.
Yep.
But the emphasis isn't, because again, like that's not my identity. So like, I don't know how to tell that story. Like, I don't know how to tell a coming out story. So to me, I had to use like friends that I have. So it was more about just like, that's just who they love and who they're with. And it's like not a thing that they do. They go to prom together. It's, more like, rather than them being like on the fringe, it's like, that's just who they are. And like, people can accept it or not, but they don't let anyone else define them either.
And that's the beauty of the generation that you're writing about and possibly writing to. And I know it's and that's one of the beautiful things is, like I said, I took that book, I took something from it, and I can pass it on to my son. I can take Runaways and read it and go, okay, Derek, you're going to love this. At the same time, he can take Amulet and go, Dad, you love fantasy, you need to read this. And so when there's multi-generational stories like that cross boundaries, and you bring, through storytelling, you can bring families, clans, friends, even people who have nothing in common together.
That's the goal, that's to, we have a lot of, one of the reasons that you know, if you read Raven, you'll see the first time you see characters that aren't Raven, they're always in color. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the reasons we had Beast Boy more in color is because it was really important to us to show people's skin color, because you know, like, I don't think there's universal physical features that, you know, mean that you're like, for example, my kids are half Cuban. My daughter's blonde, you know, like
Right,
she,
right.
because her grandmother is 100% Cuban, from Cuba, born in Cuba, but she's a blonde Cuban. She's blonde with blue eyes.
Right,
So
right.
most people don't look at my kids and think, oh, they're, you know, they're biracial, or they're, you know, part Latino. So for me, and Gabriel was saying the same thing, is he's Brazilian. And he's like, in Brazil, like, you can be black and you can have green eyes,
Right.
and like these stereotypes that, oh, this is what it looks like to be of a certain race. We kind of wanted to buck that, but we also didn't want people to default white.
Right.
We didn't
Right.
want to assume every character, if they don't, you know, like, oh, well, they're all white. So we talked a lot to DC and Michelle Wells, and Michelle's like, what if we show, and again, like, it was so cool because David Calderon's our colorist, and we sent him like all these images, like Thandie Newton and different
Yep.
biracial actors and actresses, and said, like, let's look at this range of skin tones. Like there are black women who you know, have, you know, bluer undertones and browner skin, and then there's people who have like the more reddish mahogany coloring.
Mm-hmm.
And David did this amazing thing where, like, even if there were several black characters, none of them had the same skin color. None of the
Right.
Latinx characters all had the same tone, and it was really intentional. Gabriel has a character in Beast Boy, one of the friends of the girl that Beast Boy has a crush
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
She has this cool, like, dyed kind of blondish red hair, but she is a black girl. And
Right.
you know, because again, like, not everyone who is black has dark hair.
It has kinky dark hair. Right. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's these stereotypes. It's so important to get representation and to speak to everyone. And you know, we're long past where the color palette was, you know, bad guys were of color and good guys were white. I hope we're long past that. God, I
Right.
long for that. At
Like,
least in comics, we are.
and everybody brown has like one shade of brown skin.
Right, right, right. It's yeah, it's ridiculous. Kami, I hope that as we move along and we find a vaccine and we continue to progress here, that someday we can have you on a stage at SiouxperCon and continue this conversation. I think that, well, I don't. I feel that your voice is very important, and I thank you so much for spending some time with us, because this is what we at SiouxperCon want to do. We want to have representation. We want to reach out to young readers. One of our charities is for literacy. We push literacy very hard, and I think one of the ways is to hand them accessible books like you're creating. So thank you for that so much.
Thanks so much. You know, like I said, it's the important thing is just we all keep, you know, putting out diverse stories and diverse characters. And you know, what you're doing is great, because there aren't a lot of avenues that, you know, that are lifting up you know, diverse voices and diverse creators. And you know, that's important. I feel like kids can't be something that they can't see. You know, they
Right.
need to
Right.
see, you know, they need to see people, you know, of all different races and, you know, and nationalities and religions on the page. And they need to see different creators that come from those backgrounds, so they can feel like, you know, not only are they represented, but they can be a writer, a comic book writer, a artist, you know, creator, whatever it is they want to do.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. You can find Kami's books locally at Brookings Books and Comics, at Rainbow Comics, and of course any of the big booksellers. KamiGarcia.com is the website. Follow her; she's a great follow. Also on social media. Thank you. I hope we talk again soon, Kami.
Thank you so much.